All right, so good morning, everyone. My name is Jesse Hildebrand, and I am with Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. For those joining us for the first time, we are all about bringing conservation, adventure, and science into classrooms around the world. And we are really excited for classes to be joining us this month of September as we kick off another amazing season, 2019-2020, of Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. Right now, we're joined by 6 classes live from across North America, so I want to give them a chance to do a bit of a shout out. We've got Miss McKay's grade 3s in Burlington, Ontario. Hi, guys. Hey, they're just pouring in. All right, we've got Mr. Sharp's grade 5s in Parma in Michigan. Hi, guys. Good morning. We've got Miss Archibald's grade 4s in Toronto, Ontario. Hi, guys.
Hi.
Awesome. We need that sort of enthusiasm all the time. We've got Miss Furnival's grade 3s in Guelph, Ontario. 3 grade 3 classes. If I could just find their mic. There they are. Hey, guys.
Oh, my God.
Oh, they're gone. They're coming in. That's okay. We'll find them. They were there. They disappeared. All right. We've got Miss Franz's grade 4s in Red Deer, Alberta. Hey, guys. I think they need to pack more kids in that space. You should try it. Awesome. And then last but not least, Miss Hawksley and Miss Sturgis's grade 4s in Independence, Missouri. Hi, guys. They're just coming in. Hey. Awesome. All right. Of course, the reason you guys are all here today is for our speakers. So we are joined live by Rachel Giles, who's in Toronto, Ontario, and she is an aquatic ecology and pollution researcher who looks at all that dirt, all that stuff that's created in cities and how it affects the creatures in streams and rivers and ultimately lakes and beyond. So she's joining us for an entire month dedicated to marine plastic, marine issues, and freshwater ecology. So how can we save and protect amazing animals and organisms in these ecosystems? So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Rachel. Thanks so much for joining us, and take it away.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Jesse, for the introduction. Just bear with me while I share my screen with you so you can see the presentation. Here we go. Alrighty. I think, can we see me? Or rather my slides?
We got your big slide. Oh, yeah, full screen, full slide. You're perfect.
Great. Alrighty, so thank you, Jesse, for the introduction. As he said, my name's Rachel Giles. I'm a researcher at the University of Toronto, and I'm going to be talking about the hidden gems of the stream, so aquatic invertebrates. And hopefully I can convince you by the end of my presentation today that aquatic invertebrates are really great and can tell us a lot about how river plastics and other types of pollution are affecting the health of our rivers, streams, lakes, and oceans. Ooh. Alrighty. So I am a researcher, like I said, at the University of Toronto. I am interested in pollution, different kinds of pollution that comes from cities and the surrounding areas. And I want to know how this pollution affects the wildlife that lives in these freshwater ecosystems, so in these rivers and streams. You can see in the top right corner where Toronto is, and it's right on Lake Ontario, and it's surrounded by lots of rivers and streams. And so Toronto is a really great place for us to understand the pollution that cities create and also how it affects these aquatic ecosystems that are surrounding and within the cities themselves. On the bottom, you can see some pictures of the different types of animals that I've studied throughout my career, from plants to fish, and now these strange looking creatures that we call invertebrates. And in my free time, when I'm not doing my research, I really like to travel. So you can see a picture in the bottom right. I'm in the mountains in Peru. And I also like to spend a lot of time with my family. That's my twin sister there, and we spend lots of time together. So I want to welcome all of you who are with me today in our talk about river plastics and other pollution. Like Jesse said, we've got a great spread across North America, both here in Southern Ontario, in Guelph and Burlington and Toronto, but also in the US, in Michigan and Missouri, as well as the west side of Canada in Alberta. And what I want you to think about when thinking about where we're located and where you're located is how the types of pollution that I'm going to talk about today might be the same and also might be different to what I'm talking about. And I'll talk a little bit about that, but for you to think about and reflect on after our presentation today would also be great. So I want you to think about what you think of when you think of science. What do you think a scientist looks like, and what do you think science looks like? And I'm not sure what you're thinking right now, but I can tell you that when I was younger, I thought of this. So when I thought of science, I thought of a person that was alone in a white lab coat in a dark room in a basement, doing weird tests with test tubes and chemicals, and kind of that idea of a mad scientist. And there are lots of scientists who still do that kind of science. And in fact, I spend a lot of time in the lab doing that kind of science. But what excites me most about the kind of science that I do is that the outdoors is really my laboratory. So I can go outside and see the world around me, see the trees and the water and the oceans and the lakes, and I can ask questions and try and answer them by doing my kind of science. So I spent a lot of time camping when I was a kid. I like to spend time outdoors now. And so if you're that kind of person who likes to spend time outdoors, then maybe this is a kind of science that you would be interested in. Another thing I really like about the kind of science that I get to do is that it takes me to faraway places in the world. So in the bottom right photo, there's a picture of some work that I did just recently in Vietnam. That's in Southeast Asia. It's about 24 hours of travel from here in Toronto. And there we were studying river plastics and how they were affecting the ecosystems there. So if you like the outdoors and you like traveling, and you like animals, this might be a kind of science that you'd be interested in. So when we're talking about what kind of scientist I am, I would call myself an ecotoxicologist. So that might be a word that you haven't seen before, and that's okay. We're going to talk about the different parts of the word and what that means as a whole. So eco means is short for ecology, which is when we study different types of organisms or living things and where they live in the environment, where and why. So why do we find this animal here and not there? What sorts of environments is it living in to allow it to live in one place and not the other? Toxic is also a word you might be familiar with. Something that's toxic is something that is harmful to living things. It could affect their ability to live. It could affect their ability to grow. And this could be anything from plants to animals and even humans. Ologist comes from the word ology, which means the study of. So if I am an ecotoxicologist, it means that I study toxic things or harmful things and their relationship with living things. So I study pollution and how it affects living things or wildlife. So today we're talking about specifically the types of pollution that come from rivers, and not from rivers, from cities and the areas surrounding cities. And the types of wildlife that we're talking about are invertebrates. Specifically, the types of questions I'm going to try and answer today are, first of all, what are the different types of pollution? So where could it be coming from, and what does that pollution look like? Our next question is, where does the pollution go? So if we can figure out where it's coming from and where it's going, then it leads to our last question, which is, how does the pollution affect the wildlife? So I'm going to walk you through these three questions today. And our last question, how does the pollution affect the wildlife? I tried to answer using aquatic invertebrates, which, like I said, are really interesting and can tell us about the health of an ecosystem. Okay, so the first question, what kinds of pollution come from cities? Now, this is something that you could brainstorm in your class. When I think about pollution, one of the first things I think of is factories. So when we're trying to produce new products, whether it's something we use in our home or something we use at school or something we use for something else, that factory is probably going to produce some sort of toxic substance that will go into the environment. When we're producing energy, sometimes we burn coal and that releases smoke into the air and the atmosphere. Sometimes if we're camping or we're going on hikes, we might litter. We might accidentally or purposefully throw something onto the ground that becomes litter. The type of pollution that I'm interested in is the type of pollution that comes from cars and roads and buses and trains. So if you think about how you got to school today, chances are you drove in a car, you rode a bike, you took a bus or a train or something like that. And so that vehicle that brought you to school today had pollution that came with it. So here are some pictures of the types of pollution that are related to cars and vehicles. On the top left, we have salt. So here in Southern Ontario, it's winter for a lot of the year. We put salt on the ground to melt the ice and snow so that it's safe for us to walk and for us to drive. Things like buses and cars require gasoline in order to run. And unfortunately, sometimes the gasoline will drip down onto the roads and it creates that beautiful rainbow picture, but it's actually not so great for the environment. When we're in our cars or on our bus, all of these things have tires, and when they rub against the road, they create these tiny, tiny little bits of rubber called tire dust. And tire dust is a type of plastic. So when we're talking about river plastics, this is one kind of microplastic that could enter the river or the stream. And lastly, as we use our cars and our bikes and our buses, these things get older and sometimes they rust over time. And so we have things like metals also falling onto the roads and being deposited as a kind of pollution. So it's these 4 kinds of pollution that I am trying to learn more about, the pollution that comes from cars. So now we know different kinds of pollution, specifically pollution from cars. The next question is, where does it go? So we know it's landing on the roads when we put salt on the ground or when the tires rub against the road, but how does it get to the river? So if you think about the winter time when there's lots of snow and then the spring comes along and it warms up and all of that snow melts, or if you're in a place where it doesn't snow very much, if there's a big rainfall, all of that rainwater or snow melt water, all of that's gonna wash all of the pollution that's on the road into the nearby ecosystems. And whether or not you think about that, there's probably a body of water close by you. So if you were to walk a little bit or drive a little bit, chances are you would find a stream or a pond or a lake or maybe even an ocean close by. And so the pollution that's on the roads gets carried by the rain or carried by the snow, the melted snow into a river or stream or lake or ocean, that's where it kind of ends up. So that pollution goes from the land into the water. So now we know what kinds of pollution there are and where it's going. It's going into these aquatic ecosystems, and we want to know what the effects are. How is the pollution coming from the land affecting the living things in the water? And so I ask specifically, how does the pollution that comes from cars affect invertebrates? So if we think of an example here, we've got these 4 different types of pollution, and we can look at the invertebrates in the stream to see how healthy the stream is. For those of you that aren't sure what an invertebrate is, this is a little diagram of a food web from an ocean. So we've got turtles and phytoplankton and seaweeds, jellyfish, even humans and birds. A freshwater ecosystem is very similar to this, except for that we haven't got some species. So we haven't got jellyfish, we haven't got whales or seals in lakes or rivers. But we've got a lot of the other components. We have fish, we have humans, we have phytoplankton or algae. We've also got zooplankton and invertebrates. So the invertebrates are the things here at the bottom of the stream. They live in the mud or the sediment at the bottom of the lake or the ocean or the stream. And they are things like mussels, worms, and baby or larval insects. So a dragonfly larva or a beetle larva or even a sort of caterpillar or moth type larva can all be found and are all considered benthic invertebrates. So here are some pictures of invertebrates that you can find where I do my research. So I know we have a group here from Toronto. I do my work in the Humber River, which is one of the larger rivers and more urban rivers in Toronto. And these are some of the pictures of the different invertebrates that I can find or have found in the Humber River where I do my work. And in my hand there is a picture of a freshwater mussel. So they get pretty big, or they can, depending on the species. What you can see from this slide is that there's a huge variety of aquatic invertebrates. And because there's so much diversity or biodiversity, there are certain species that are able to live in more polluted or less polluted environments. And so when we go into a river, we can see how many different kinds of species we find or how diverse it is. And that can tell us about how healthy the stream is. So if we're thinking about the example of pollution from cars and how it might affect invertebrates, if we're in a stream or a river where there's no pollution, we would expect to find lots of different kinds of invertebrates. We'd find mussels and worms and larvae and little caterpillar larvae and stuff like that. And then if we were to go into an environment where there's lots of pollution, say like the city of Toronto, we would expect to only find a few species. And the species that we find in these really polluted areas are the species that are able to survive with these high levels of pollution. So rather than seeing lots of diversity, we see only a little bit of diversity, and we see just a lot of those few species or groups. And so that is how we tell if an ecosystem is healthy or not so healthy. And that's how we use aquatic invertebrates as bioindicators. And this is why they're so cool and why I think they're the gems of the stream, because they can tell us about how healthy the ecosystem is. Instead of having to study lots of different parts of the stream to tell us whether or not the stream is healthy, we can look at this one group of organisms. And based on how much diversity we find, we can say, yes, the stream is doing pretty well, or no, the stream is not doing so well. So again, in a healthy ecosystem, we find lots of diversity. And in an unhealthy ecosystem, we find not so much diversity. So by looking at the diversity of invertebrates only, these bioindicators of ecosystem health, they can tell us how the pollution from cars and perhaps other kinds of pollution as well affect wildlife. So you might have a question about how we actually collect these invertebrates. This is one of the most fun parts for me as a scientist. So the first thing that we do is we have to actually get to the stream. So this is a picture of our field van. We drive it out about 2 hours outside of Toronto, and that's all of our gear there. We then go into the stream and we put this piece of equipment. It's called a Hess sampler. It looks kind of like a giant pot for soup. And you put that in the bottom of the stream, and that collects some of the mud, and you stir up the inside of the Hess sampler to stir up all of the invertebrates that are living in the mud at the bottom of the stream. Then you take that Hess sampler out of the water and you make sure that all the invertebrates are inside of that net, the little white thing that's hanging down. And we put them into a container and fill up the container with ethanol or alcohol, which keeps the invertebrates from degrading or rotting. And then we take that container back to the lab. We look at it under a microscope, and based on what they look like, we can figure out which species they are, which groups that might be more sensitive to pollution, and which species might be able to survive in really polluted environments. So we've learned about the different types of pollution that come from cities, whether it be from littering or from factories, from coal, burning of coal, or even from roads. And we've learned about how we can look at invertebrates to be bioindicators that tell us about how healthy the stream is. But you might be wondering what you can do in your own household, in your communities, and in your schools to reduce the different types of pollution that are coming into your rivers and streams and lakes and oceans. So first thing that I would suggest is to lead a cleanup. So this is a picture here actually of this past weekend. Saturday was International Coastal Cleanup Day. So what that means is that people all throughout the world were leading cleanups in their neighborhoods. So they would go out either to their rivers or their lake shores, or maybe even in just their neighborhoods, because our neighborhoods are connected to our water, and they would clean up litter. When you clean up litter, you also record how much you find and what kinds you find. And so in addition to actually cleaning up your neighborhood and reducing the pollution in your own households, you're also creating data that gets sent to basically a website that scientists can use to do research. So you're not only having an impact on your local communities, but you're also creating data that scientists can use throughout the world in order to better understand litter and how it affects the environment. You can also go into your homes or your other communities and share what you've learned today. Talk to others about the different types of pollution and where it comes from, and how we can use different wildlife to understand how healthy an ecosystem is. When talking about the pollution that comes from cars specifically, you can change your own habits. So maybe once a week you walk to school instead of taking a car. Maybe you carpool instead of driving with just your family. You also, as students and as kids who are in schools, have a lot of potential to have impact on your local government. So if this is an issue that you care about, whether it's the tire dust, the little bits of microplastics, or whether it's the salt use, you can write to your local government and tell them, hey, this is an issue that we know about, it's an issue that we care about, and it's something that we want to do something about. And maybe there's ways that your local government can make changes to the way that they're behaving now to reduce the effects of pollution in your communities. Lastly, when it comes to something like salt, I know it isn't used as much in Alberta because it's too cold, but maybe for those of you who are in Southern Ontario and perhaps even in Missouri, you can look at how much salt you're using and reduce it so that you're still being safe on your sidewalks and on your roads, but you're not overusing the salt. And lastly, I have at the bottom here a Twitter handle of a group that I'm a part of, that's who's pictured in this photograph here. So we're called the U of T Trash Team, and we do all sorts of stuff related to waste literacy and mostly litter as a type of pollution. So if you're interested in learning about the different types of activities that we take part in, or you want to learn more about litter specifically, feel free to follow us on Twitter or visit our website, and you can learn more about what we're doing as a team. So with that, I'd like to thank all of you for listening to my presentation. And I know that you probably have lots more questions about other river plastics and invertebrates, or just about what my work is like as a scientist. So I will stop sharing my screen now, and I'll pass it over back to Jesse to take questions.
Outstanding. Well, thank you so much, Rachel. That was marvelous. And yeah, we're going to dive in with questions. Before we start, I just want to note we've got 9 groups watching on YouTube, including Ms. Auber's class and Ms. Reeves' class. So if you guys want to identify yourselves, let me know where you're calling in from and type in some questions. I'd be happy to pass them on. But yeah, let's dive in, and we'll start with Miss McKay's group. If you guys want to kick us off with a question, come on up.
Does anyone have a question? Okay.
No.
Ryan?
I was wondering, how does the water get polluted if you put the salt on the ground when you need it for the snow so people don't slip and break their heads?
Yeah. Oh, Rachel, you're muted for some reason. There we go. Let's unmute. We'll just keep you unmuted the whole time. There you go. You're good.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay. So remember how I said the pollution starts on the roads, and then when it rains or when the snow melts, it gets flushed into the streams? So if you've ever been walking on the sidewalk, if you've ever seen those little grates or they're little metal holes on the side of the road, those are called storm drains. And so that is basically a tube that takes all of the water that's off of the roads, it goes through a big tube, and it ends up in the stream. So that's how the salt gets from the road to the river, is through that tube, the storm drain. Sometimes it will just flow off of the land straight into the stream. But I think your question is also about, well, we can't stop using salt, right? Because we need it for our sidewalk safety. And you're right, we do need salt to keep us from slipping and falling. And it's not so much that we should stop using salt, it's that we're really using it more than we need to. So instead of doing things like shoveling our driveway, we're just putting salt directly on the snow. So what I suggest is that you actually shovel your driveway, and then you can use a lot less salt so that we're reducing the amount of salt that goes into our ecosystems.
Outstanding. Thank you so much, Rachel. All right, let's go to Mr. Sharp's class. If you guys have a question, go for it.
This is two questions. Worst person is that and in the part where she's talking about the river, and I said, does that mean we have plastic in our body?
Oh, that's a great question. So I'm part of an ecotoxicology lab, which means most of when we're studying plastics and microplastics, we're mostly interested in whether or not they're in animals and if they're affecting animals. There are lots of other researchers who study whether or not plastics are in our bodies. So I can tell you that we know that animals have plastics in their body. We've found plastics in the stomachs of things like fish and even the invertebrates that I'm talking to you about. And there are people that study plastics in people, and we know that we are being exposed to them. So there are plastics in the air, there are plastics in our drinking water, and there are plastics in things like mussels and shrimps that we consume. So we do know that we are, say, eating or drinking them, but we don't really know yet what the effects of those are, or if they're really staying in our bodies, or we're just kind of getting rid of them when we go to the bathroom.
Yeah, great answer. I just want to make sure so your first question, when you said it, you said one line and there was like a bing on the computer, so I missed one line. Did we get both your questions there, or was there another?
What's the worst pollution you've ever seen?
So it's hard to say what's the worst kind, like whether it's pollution, like I said, pollution that comes from littering or pollution that comes from cars. I think it really depends on where you are. The amount of pollution and the type of pollution varies a lot. But I can tell you that when I was in Vietnam studying river plastics there was, some places that we went where there was so much litter. And so I was really shocked to see how much pollution, how much litter there was on the beaches and on the shorelines there.
Excellent. Well, not excellent, bad, but great answer. All right, Miss Archibald's class, if you guys want to come up.
If you use like sand to like melt the snow and stuff, would it still be polluting?
That's a great question. So are you guys in Alberta?
Miss Archibald? No, they're the Toronto group.
Okay, because salt is only effective in some places, and that has to do with how cold it gets. So in some places like Alberta, they use gravel or sand instead of salt. So I know that, and we know as scientists, that the salts affect the invertebrates. It affects which ones are able to live there. I'm sure that having more sand in your rivers and streams would affect what animals are able to live there, but it would be in a different way. So that's another type of pollution that would have different effects. What those effects are, I don't know because I don't study sand, but I'm sure that there would be effects.
Interesting question. Great job, guys. All right, Miss Furnival's class. You guys have one? Come on up. Every time we go to Miss Furnival's class, there's only like 50 hands. I know. It's the best problem to have.
Okay. Come on up.
Do you like saving the rivers?
Yes, I do. Like I said, I spent a lot of time outdoors. I spent a lot of time camping and fishing. My dad's a fisherman. And so it's really rewarding for me to study the pollution in rivers and feel like I'm making a difference both here in Toronto, but also throughout the world as well.
Outstanding. All right, Miss Franz's class. So we're going to Alberta now. Come on up, guys.
Does polluting cause climate change?
Does pollution cause climate change? So that's a complicated question, but I can tell you that plastics are made from oil. So the things that we have, for example, in the tar sands in Alberta, when we're taking petrochemicals out or oil out of the ground, we use that to make plastic. And we know that plastic is a type of pollution. We also know that the burning of fossil fuels puts, sorry, I have some noise over here. The burning of fossil fuels puts chemicals into the environment that are contributing to climate change. So yes and no. We know that pollution is not a great thing, but it depends how you define climate change and how you want to talk about those relationships. But we know that plastic is made from oil and those types of chemicals, and that the burning of those things puts chemicals into the environment that are impacting climate change and changing our climates.
Yeah. So yes, but on by and large, two issues that are both affecting environments in different ways, that are both bad and both something that we need to challenge and talk about.
Exactly. And they're linked as well.
Yeah. All right, let's go to Independence, Missouri, as Miss Hawksley and Miss Sturgis's groups. If you guys want to come up, go for it.
My name's Tucker from Missouri, and I have a question. So you guys were talking about the bugs that live in the water and the mud. Why do they live in the water and the mud?
Oh, good question.
Tucker.
Okay, so the question was about the bugs that live in the water and the mud and why they live there. So there's certain animals. So like I said, the baby or larval stage of certain insects are invertebrates. So an easy one to think of is a dragonfly. So when a dragonfly is, when it emerges out of its egg, it's a larval insect. So it looks kind of like a weird bug. There's actually, some of my slides had pictures of it, but they like to live in the water, and that's where they are able to survive and grow, and they eat the things in the water. So they like the water because it gives them the habitat, so the sort of home that they need, and also the food that they need. And then once they've grown enough, then they go up to the water and they sort of sprout their wings, and that's when they become a dragonfly that would then fly around on land and in the air. So there's some animals that live there for only a part of their life. And then there are some animals like mussels that like to live in the stream for their whole life. And that's again because it gives them the food and the habitat that they like to live in. So mussels like to eat algae, they're filter feeders, and they also like to attach or go down into the mud. So the mud gives them protection. And so they like to live in the mud because they're able to eat, but they're also able to avoid getting eaten by things like birds.
Excellent. I love the deeply scientific term of weird bugs. We've done a whole bunch of hangouts with weird bugs. And so I think this is one of your slides earlier for classes. I encourage you to look up caddis flies later, because they are the weirdest little things. They like make themselves little houses. I'll pass along the link when we're done, but they're very cool. All right, so we've done a first round of questions. I'm going to pass along a few from groups online. And if other groups online want to pass on some too, please do. And then we'll do a whole other round with all the classes that are live. So Miss Reeves' class, who are perennial favorites on YouTube with us from Leamington, Ontario, grade 4s, wanted to ask, do you do anything to help fish that are in the rivers? And I think specifically fish.
Yeah, so that's a great question. I do not study fish directly. So when I go into the rivers, I don't go fishing and look and see what fish are there. However, fish eat invertebrates. And so by looking at the invertebrates and trying to help the pollution that's affecting the invertebrates, I'm indirectly helping the fish. I do have people in my lab who study pollution, different types of pollution, a lot of plastics, and they study fish. So I have one of my lab mates studies fish in the Arctic. I have 2 lab mates who study fish in the Great Lakes. And so all of us work together and share our knowledge to sort of help the ecosystem as a whole. But generally, we only study one part. So I study invertebrates, they study fish. There's other people who study seabirds, for example.
Excellent. And then the other online question, so Miss Auber's class, grade 4s in Medina, Ohio, wanted to ask what animals are most affected by road pollution?
Oh, that's a great question. So, you know how I said there's four different types of pollution that come from roads? There's salt, there's gasoline, there's tire dust, and there's metals. Different species will be the most affected by those four different types. So, for example, freshwater mussels are really affected by metals. Versus there's some types of invertebrates that breathe through gills that are really affected by salt. So depending on the type of pollution, some species will be more affected or less affected, and it really depends on that specific type of pollution.
All right, let's do another round, guys. So we'll start with Miss McKay's class. If you guys want to kick us off, go right ahead.
So what type of food does the invertebrates eat in the water?
Eat? Yeah. So there are different types of invertebrates that have what we call different feeding strategies. So, excuse me, if you think about a blue whale is a filter feeder. So it eats by basically sucking in water and then keeping the food in its mouth and getting rid of the water. So there are some invertebrates that are filter feeders like that. For example, mussels are filter feeders. There are also some invertebrates that eat things like leaf litter. So when the leaves in the fall drop their leaves, they go to the bottom of the river. And things like caddisflies that Jesse was talking about earlier, they like to eat leaf debris and sort of plants that are decomposing. So it depends on the invertebrate, but some will eat algae, some will eat leaves. Generally, they eat stuff that's at the bottom of the river in the mud or the sediment.
Awesome. All right, let's head to Mr. Sharp's class. Come on up, guys.
What does the different types of pollution do to different parts of the environment?
Ooh, that's the question.
Yeah. So there's for each type of pollution, there are different ways that it can affect the environment. Like I said, I'm really interested in the living things. So I'm really interested in the invertebrates. One thing that, for example, salt can do to plants is it can basically prevent them from living. So sometimes you'll see after the winter, if you're on a sidewalk, you'll see that there's some nice green grass on either sides of the sidewalk and then big brown patches right beside the sidewalk. That could be because the salt has sort of drained into the soil and the plant isn't able to survive in such salty soil. So sometimes plants can't live. Like I said, sometimes the metals in the water can prevent or keep the mussels from living. Sometimes it can affect how they grow, so they can't grow very big, or if they grow, they have some sort of deformity. Maybe their back is crooked or their heart doesn't beat properly. It can really be a change that's really small that we can't see, that's inside the animal, or it can be a change that's really big, like the plant's not being there at all.
Okay. All right, let's head back to Toronto. So Miss Archibald's class. Oh, they had to go. All right, Miss Furnival's class. Let's go to you guys. If you have a question, come on up. Take your time, no hurry, all good. Hey. Oh. Yeah, do you want to ask? Go right ahead. No worries. Actually, it seems to be, I don't know why, you're muted when you shouldn't be. So I'll come back in just a second, guys, okay? We'll go to Miss Franz's group for now, and then I'll come right back.
What happens when the pollution breaks down, but the water is still polluted?
Okay, so there's a few different things that we can do to reduce the pollution or get rid of the pollution, and it depends on which type of pollution we're talking about. One thing that I think is really cool is these things called stormwater gardens or bioswales. So remember that grate that I was talking about that you might see on the sidewalk when you're walking to school? We can basically create little gardens around them that will catch some of that pollution. So if there's tire dust or microplastics, they get caught up in the soil. If there's metals or the chemicals in gasoline, they basically get sucked into the soil. And so in that way, the rain garden, the stormwater garden, or what's called the bioswale, it acts almost like a filter for removing pollution from the streams. So that is one thing that we can do to reduce the pollution that's going into the streams. And then there's other things that we can do to clean up the streams themselves. Sometimes we even have water being less in rivers, more in lakes, but sometimes we'll even take water, pump water out, filter it, and put it back into the lake. There's also natural things we can do within the lake, so we can plant more plants and we can build habitat on the sides of the stream, so we can also plant more plants and put things in the river that animals can live in and create habitat for them. But these things take a really long time. So it takes a long time, and it takes a lot of effort over many years to get a stream to go from a polluted state to a more clean and restored state.
Sorry, there we go. Sorry, let's do 3 more questions before we wrap up. I know lunch is coming soon, guys, so I want to pass along one from Ms. Reeves' class first. So this is online. What cities get the most polluted rivers? Do you know, Rachel?
So it depends on what kind of pollution you're talking about. It tends to be, and now I don't want to say this and have this be the final answer, because as we continue to do research, we're learning more about the different kinds of pollution. But we do know that cities that are growing really quickly, have a lot of population growth, tend to be the cities that have more pollution. And this is because there's more and more people, and not necessarily, there's not, for example, we don't have garbage pickups in these places that are growing very quickly to manage things like litter. And so in these cities that are growing very quickly, we need people and the government to be able to catch up with that so we can manage the pollution. So I don't want to name specific places in the world, but I can say that cities that are growing quickly tend to be the ones that have more pollution, because we're trying to catch up with it and manage it.
Okay, we're going to take 2 more quick ones. I know some classes have to go, so let's go to the girl who's been patiently waiting so much in Missouri. Thank you so much for waiting. You have a question? Come on up.
Hi, my name's Sophia from Independence, Missouri, and my question was, how much salt is that can cause a problem for pollution?
That's a great question. I'm going to, I actually was in Missouri earlier this year, and I was talking to some people who study salt and how it affects river invertebrates. So there's people actually in Missouri who can help you answer these questions in your own rivers. But I can tell you that, so if it's icy and you have just about enough salt to fill your palm, that is enough salt for a whole meter squared. So a meter is about 3 feet. So 3 feet by 3 feet, that's enough salt for that whole area. So it's really not a lot of salt that you need to melt all of the ice. And that helps to reduce our salt. Another thing you can do is mix the salt with water, so it becomes a brine, and then you put that salty water on your sidewalks or your driveways, and that's another way to help reduce the salt.
Excellent. All right, and then we'll take one last one from Ms. Furnival's class. Hopefully the audio is working. Come on up, let's see if we can get this working. And if not, then we can pass along questions after the fact, because Rachel's really good for that sort of thing, okay? Yeah. No, we're not hearing it all. Oh.
It's just she hasn't said it yet, but she
is. Oh, there you go. Good. Perfect.
Just a little quiet. Go ahead.
How many years have you been studying?
How many years have I been studying?
Yeah.
Okay, so I graduated from high school, and then I did my undergraduate degree. So that's 4 years of school. And now I'm a PhD student, and I'm in my 2nd year. So I did, when do we start school? When we're 4 or 5? Well, 4 or 5 up to 18 is about 14 years, plus 4 years of undergrad is 18 years, plus I'm in my 2nd year. So I'm in my 20th year of school.
So you're just starting out, guys, in grade 3. Good luck. All right. This was marvelous, Rachel. Thank you so much. Before we wrap up, is there any last message you want to share with classes? Anywhere they can go to learn more? You've already pointed out a few, but just a reminder.
Yeah, I would say check out the U of T trash team and you can learn more about litter. You can also check out my own Twitter and hopefully I'll have a website soon. But really the message is just learn about the world that you live in, learn about your communities and what sorts of pollution exists in the communities that you live in, and act in a way that has an impact in your communities. So if you have a lot of litter, do a cleanup. If you have a lot of salt, reduce your salt. So learn about your communities and make change there first.
Super cool. All right, so what we do at the end of every hangout for our classes that are here, I'm going to demute everyone's microphone in a second. So Miss McKay, Miss Franz, Miss Sturgis, Miss Furnival, if you guys could all join me in saying a huge thank you to Rachel for joining us today. You are all demuted. Fast presentation. All right. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Thank you so much for joining us, class, today. We look forward to having you back soon. Rachel, thank you so much. That was marvelous.
Thanks, everybody.
All right. Have a nice day, everyone. Bye for now.